Oh, okay. On that happy note, I hand over the questions to you.
Well, Veton, I was wondering, I mean, when Kosovo became independent, I mean, it had its strong allies in the US and in Europe. Um, and now that this relationship is breaking down, do you feel like Kosovo has to make a choice between those two, and what should it do when it has these two large, one country, the US and the European Union, which have been critical in supporting its independence.
Well, one of them is emotional. You know that we have an emotional link to the United States, as you see in all the polls. We are the most pro-American country in the world, and rightly so because we were existentially saved basically by U.S. action and U.S. leadership, and then the Western action. But I think what we need to understand is, as Kosovars, that we are now at a moment like in 1989, and then we made rational decisions about trying to understand where the world is heading and trying to be part of that historical stream. I think the historical stream will be moving, as we discussed earlier, in redefining European identity, and we need to define ourselves as part of that stream. And that means basically on everything from security to the fundamental values. Those values we fought hardly for them in a transition, and so they are not only important for vis-a-vis Europe, but vis-a-vis ourselves in our own functioning democracy. A functioning democracy is needed not for the Copenhagen criteria, but because of ourselves. And so our relationship with the United States is continuously necessary because there's not an equal response from the European Union. 5 member states do not recognize Kosovo. So we cannot have the facility of communication that we have had until now with the United States. There's not a choice, there's not a fork on the road for us. We will continue. I think we ought to continue with our relationship with the United States. We ought to continue with a very clear idea of European integration. We always thought Euro-Atlantic integration. We ought to still be thinking about Euro-Atlantic integration because we're a small country. We will not define the nature of that relationship.
And if you would, being aware of the constraints of the European Union, you mentioned the five non-recognizers. What would be your advice? What should, let's say, a commission president or let's say a German chancellor do to really unlock this process? Get Kosovo moving towards the European Union.
We need to get to a point. I mean, we need to a synchronization of strategic thought. Because Europe now is entering a phase in which it needs to define the continent as a single security space, a space of shared security. Western Balkans needs to be part of that shared security. Shared security with a clear message from the United States that it doesn't want to be a guarantor of it. If that is the case, then there's no way there's going to be an integration of the Western Balkans unless it is considered a shared security space. Part of the indications can be, countries signing defense agreements between themselves, but the Western Balkans needs to be invited now in devising a shared European space. These are early stages of debate in the European Union about it. It's not only about, of course, soldiers, etc. It's about armed production and budgets and things like that. So I think, in that sense, this would be a starting point because we have been stuck in this game of incremental. In the past 25 years, you do a bit of your reforms, and we pretend that you're doing reforms, and you pretend that you're doing reforms, and then everybody's happy in this stabilitocratic fashion. So this would be a path.
To get out of that dynamic. So maybe the last question, I'd be curious to hear, what's your expectations of relations with Serbia? I mean, that's, the big, of course, has a lot of implications for Kosovo, for the non-recognizers. How do you see that? I mean, in light of the protests we've talked about, the difficult relations with the Vucic's, instigating violence in Kosovo.
There are several stages of it. The end stage to which we should aspire is a stage in which Kosovo and Serbia live in peace, in a culture of peace as well. I mean, if we normalize relations today, Serbia recognizes Kosovo today, there will still be hatred in our societies for many years ahead. And so we need to think of it as a stage, the final stage of our normalization ought to be our countries and our peoples living in peace, as part of a very peaceful region, as part of a peaceful Europe. And that is something that will take not only this generation, but the next ones as well to work. But in order to do that, we need to get to the basics of normalization, which is mutual respect of our countries, states, societies, and then engage in mutual respect of identities and things like that. I think what is happening is there's a double process that is happening, a competing process. One is Serb nationalism in Bosnia and Herzegovina with Dodik. The other is a new form of Serbian nationalism of Serbia, and not necessarily of the Serb nation itself. So, because what we have seen in these protests are people claiming, in their majority, I'm not speaking, there's plenty of everything in it, but in its majority, it is about defining Serbia, not Serbianhood, but Serbia itself as a state. And this would be a first phase of normalization. You cannot have normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo unless there's normalization of Serbia first, and normalization of Kosovo, of course, within it. I think we are at a stage in which we might see things evolving positively in Serbia, because once you start caring about Serbia and not caring about how Podgorica is being run, or Banja Luka, or the level of inclusion or direction that Kosovo Serbs have, or the association of municipalities, things like that, then you are actually trying to set your house in order. And a house that is in order then can communicate with other houses.
I think that's a very optimistic,
I hope so.
Way to end.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Florian. And I hope we will see this from a more optimistic note in fall. I think you will be coming, and then we will sit and engage in another conversation. Thank you very much.
Sounds good.